Good morning and welcome to CommsCamp. Obviously going into week 8 now, and what we're going to be covering today is channels. So I think, as we've said throughout the whole programme, we have designed the wheel in a specific order. So we very much feel like the channels discussion needs to wait until you really understand your audience and you understand your strategy. So we've purposely kept channels till probably what feels like quite late on. I know people are often keen to jump straight into the tactics and, how are we going to deliver this via Instagram or Facebook? And sometimes channels will come earlier and sometimes it will be a channel specific strategy. But I would say on the whole, when you're looking at a big, creative, strategic, long-term plan, it is always best to keep channels until, really quite close to the end. So in our capability planner, we have 5 key questions around channels. The first one is just about using the correct channels to reach the audience. And although that sounds really simple, I think that's something we'll hopefully cover today around mapping the channels out and actually mapping each channel against an audience. And that's where you can really deliver some really good communications when you're adapting your content and your channel strategy for each audience that you might reach. We then have a question around having a planned approach. So for example, with media as one of your channels, using embargoes, pre-pitching, thinking about exclusives. So really trying to maximize the reach of your stories. And I think that's, a big shift from maybe many years ago when people saw PR as pushing a press release out to lots of people. And now we're much more focused in on getting it to the right people and securing the quality coverage that we really want. I'm really pleased today that we have Kristy Dorsey joining us, and she's being interviewed today by Rosemary, so that's later on. So she will give the perspective of the business newsroom in the Herald and how they work day to day. Then thinking about digital channels and having a clear strategy for those, making sure the channels are meeting the objectives. Something we're going to show you today is a channel map that shows a huge number of different channels that you could be considering. And I think what's really important here is to step back and think about the resource you have and your strategic objectives, and then to, pinpoint and narrow down your channels. So while we're going to show you lots today, I don't want anyone to take that away and think we need to be over more channels. It might even be about being on less channels, but doing it better. And then effectively, are our channels all working together? Are we delivering the same message? And are we using one channel to complement another channel? So this is the map that I mentioned of all the channels that are right there. Now we call this the PISO model. So from the left, it's paid, earned, shared, and owned. So PISO, I would say increasingly, even, since PISO was created, the lines are blurring and changing. So whereas you might be running a piece of influencer activity, that could be paid, some of it could be earned, it's also shared. So I would say this is a good starting point for mapping out your channels, but try not to worry too much about where a particular channel might sit, because actually a lot of this can sit across lots of different sections. What we're going to do is just run through these from the top right and touch on some of the different channels that are out there. As I said, you should not be expecting to be across all of these channels generally, unless you're, a huge organization with some really complex needs. That means that you should be. So maybe thinking about Coca-Cola, they probably to some level use all of these channels. If you're not Coca-Cola, you probably don't need to. You probably just need to focus in on which things are going to work for you the best and where are you going to get the most bang for your buck. So up on the top right, we start with earned media. I know most of us are PR professionals, so I would say this is the starting point, because we are generally starting most of our planning from an earned first approach, I would imagine. Increasingly, we're we're putting spin behind things, but certainly earned is probably where our brains are wired to, compared to maybe colleagues. So earned is about media relations. I really like the fact that influencers is up here with earned, particularly from an agency perspective. If you think about which agency you would take your influencer comms to, people talk about influencers being new, but as comms people and PR people, I think if you look back many, many years, we've always been doing influencer relations. It's always been about how do we take our story and share that through the person that can deliver it best to the audience. So to me, influencer relations isn't a new thing. I think it's just really been packaged up a bit differently. Investor relations, so particularly important if you're working for a listed company, in which case there may be some really important regulations that you need to follow. Certainly when I've worked on listed businesses, there have been rules around any communications that we do that could impact a share price. You know, we need to be sending that to the stock market and the stock exchange prior to going out to media or at the same time. So IR really is a very specialist area of communications. Blogger relations, much like influencers, and link building. So certainly with digital clients in particular, and when you look at search engine optimization, which is in here as well, link building is incredibly important. And again, another one, word of mouth, which I also feel has been, it's been something we've been doing for years as PR people, and word of mouth and influencer and blogger relations are all really quite tied in and linked together. I'm thinking about community, so we see that as being shared media. So community, that could be about building communities, whether that's, advocates who are customers of yours or service users if you're maybe a charity. And it's also about engaging them and maybe trying to move those who don't agree with you into a better position. Also using your biggest fans and making them super fans that will spread your wonderful messages to all of their own network. I'm thinking about brand ambassadors, whether that's celebrity ambassadors, but also just case studies day to day, people who, are real people with real stories to tell of how your product or service has helped them. And then in there, we have user-generated content. Again, I would tie that quite closely back to influencer. And that's where you'll see that these things do have quite a big crossover. And we then have partnerships. So in particular, CSR and corporate social responsibility, maybe working with charities and so on. Then you have your shared media. So that would be things like organic social, securing reviews, and also maybe using a platform. If you sell a product in particular, you might want to use a platform to manage your reviews so that you can really use those to promote your product back out to its potential audience. And then we've got content distribution, curation, publishing, different ways that you could reach your market. Maybe a more innovative example of that is one of our clients, Class Bento. So they provide a marketplace that matches teachers with students for artisan classes. So if you make chocolate truffles, you could be placing your content onto Class Bento and sending packs out to people so that they could take part in a chocolate making workshop, for example, at home. We then have search engine optimization, SEO. So again, if you do really good PR and social, that's all going to help you to move your brand up in the search engine rankings. But a really important channel to consider, particularly when it comes to thinking about your content. Owned media. So again, I would say this is probably primarily the stuff that you control. It's probably sitting on your website and your own social media channels. It could be your blogs, it could be podcasts, video content. For ourselves, I would call CommsCamp one of our sort of owned media channels. And anything really that you control. and you serve out to people. So then crossing over between owned and paid, you have things like affiliate marketing. So if you're working with somebody and giving them commission based on links being clicked, that would be affiliate. Email marketing, I feel like that's a bit of a swear word just now when people feel they've moved on from email marketing, but actually it's incredibly effective. If you have a really good list that's opted into and completely GDPR legal and compliant, and then if you've got some really magical content, email marketing can really drive particularly sales and engagement and sign-ups. A really good example of that is the platform Nude, which is for people saving up to buy their first property. So it's a fintech product. It's effectively an online bank for savings. And they have this fantastic email that goes out regularly to their subscribers called Adult-ish. So they've really hit onto their audience there, and they've identified that their core audience is people that are just going onto the property ladder. They feel adult-ish, so it's all about this new realization of standing on your own 2 feet and almost being an adult, but sometimes maybe not feeling like you are. So the content they have in there is really emotive, and it reads much more like a magazine than like a sales pitch. Paid, so really worthwhile including paid within your strategy. Obviously, it's depending on your budget availability. But something again that we see so often is people putting huge effort into the owned and the shared and creating fantastic content that sits on their channels. But if they're not using paid channels to boost that reach, then it's a relatively small organic audience that you might have. So it's a really good way to reach a wider audience and get your product or your service or your message in front of the key audience. And the thing I love so much about paid is how targetable it is, particularly if you look at social media profiling. So if you have a B2B message that you want to share on LinkedIn, for example, you can refine it all the way down to what job title does that person have, which geography are they in, how long have they been in the business. You can think about things such as how fast is this company growing? Is it adding on people at a rate of more than 30% per year, let's say? Maybe that's a key point when you think people will buy from you. So some really good information that you can use there to target things. And then marketing communications. So we are actually going through a repositioning program at the moment for the agency, where we're moving much more towards talking about us as a PR communications and marketing agency, because increasingly there is a big shift in the way people talk about comms and where comms is. So if you look at that full spectrum of channels, we very much want to have the big idea, which would sit in the middle, and then deliver it across those channels. So we are very much moving ourselves away from just being about the earned media in the top right hand side. And then finally, reputation, which we have covered already in a full session of CommsCamp, but looking at things like thought leadership, trust and credibility, and trying to benchmark that reputation. And clearly reputation is critical. And again, that's sitting in the center there, and all these different things that you can do around the outside can all help to build your reputation and credibility. So one of the areas that's not specifically in the current PISO model, but is dotted around all the way really, is thinking about inbound. And I felt like today that was quite an interesting one that I thought we could go into a little bit more detail on. We obviously don't have time in one CommsCamp session to cover every single area of the PISO wheel in a lot of detail, but I wanted to touch on inbound. So inbound marketing effectively is people coming to you. So if you have products for sale, it's people just going and self-serving and identifying those products, putting them in their basket and completing the sale. If you work in B2B, it might be about lead generation. So it's people that are finding you somewhere, they're filling in a lead generation form, and then you are waking up in the morning, logging in, and you've got some nice leads sitting there that are kind of ready to go already. And then in the third, in the public sector, inbound might be about referrals in for a service, or it's really just something that you're not going out and working for sort of one-to-one. It's not cold calling, it's not sort of outreach that's one-to-one. It's generally creating some really nice what we call inbound content that pulls people in and then takes them on a journey, and effectively they end up in some form of funnel that you might have. So a really good place to go and find out more about inbound is HubSpot. If you move up the chain with them, it can get quite expensive, but the things that they offer for free are really, really high value. So first of all, this page that we have on the screen at the moment is their certification program. So there's a huge number of training courses that they have on their website completely for free. So you don't need any experience. You can sort it by, from beginner all the way up to expert level. And if you log in and follow these, they give you some really good content around what makes outbound work. So a really good thing to have on your CV as well is just getting some of those certifications up your sleeve. So that's one thing you can get from HubSpot. The other thing they do is they have a completely free CRM. It's limited to certain numbers of users and contacts, but it's quite generous, and you can even send email out using it up to a certain limit, again for free each month. So I would say if you're just getting started with CRM, which is customer relationship management software, then the free version of HubSpot should really get you started and give you a good foundation into inbound and using CRMs. And then as you build your strategy and start to need more, you can pay to add services on to HubSpot if that's what you want to do. So that moves us on to making a plan for our channels. So the homework, which we'll talk about later on, is really to evaluate all the channels that you have at the moment. So I would make a list. I would think about it in the 4 categories. So PISO, paid, earned, shared, owned. And I would list out every channel, and there I would try and get quite specific. So don't just say social media. I would have Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, whichever ones you currently use or you really want to use. And then from there, if you can map out which audience do you think it's best suited for, or which audience do you reach the best, and try and again be quite specific here. So to give you an example, the way that we work at Muckle, to give you 2, so you've got a comparison, we use LinkedIn and we use Facebook. Now, LinkedIn, our audience is communications managers and directors at medium to large size companies. So we've got a really clear and refined audience there. And then separately, we use Facebook, but we think of Facebook more as a recruitment tool. So for us, Facebook is probably more about showing people what we do, so that when we come to recruit new staff, we're getting staff in through Facebook. Again, I've talked about blurring lines, and I do think people still buy services through Facebook. So we need to make it talk to both, but our core priority on Facebook really is staff recruitment rather than a sort of hard sell, which we don't do either on LinkedIn, but our LinkedIn content is very much more about trying to get people into a sales funnel with us. So I would list these out, and I would start with an audit. So think about what you've got and what you do. So where you are now. And then I would create a second version of this where you map out where you want to be and where you see the opportunity. And I would make sure this is realistic. So do not try to replicate every single channel from the PISO model into your plan unless you have a very large team and a big budget. It's much better to try and refine this, to think about what's achievable at the moment. And then once you've got that, you can think about the frequency. So is it a weekly email newsletter? Is it a quarterly email newsletter? You might even want to duplicate these. So you could say email newsletter to stakeholders, and that might go out quarterly and include political stakeholders, maybe some of the community local to you. Then you might have a separate email newsletter which is going out to customers, or if you're a charity, maybe you've got a donor email newsletter that goes out to tell people how you're using the funds that they're donating. So think about the frequency, and then I would put some bullet point guidelines in here as well around what's the tone of voice for this channel, what are the core objectives, does it follow some type of formula? So if it's email newsletter, you might have a specific formula that you use every month where you cover one news story, one case study, and one meet the team, for example, and then a call to action at the end. So those could be your usage guidelines. And also worth having a think about your hashtags and any other content you might want to keep consistent. So now really excited that Kristy Dorsey from the Herald is joining us. She's a business correspondent, and she's being interviewed today by Rosie.
Hello, I'm Rosie Gallagher, a director with Muckle Media. I've got Kristy Dorsey here today, who's a business correspondent with the Herald. She's going to talk to us about her career in journalism, what sort of pressure she's under, what she looks for in a story, and just give us some insight into life on business desk of a Scottish daily newspaper. So thanks, Kristy, for your time today.
Yeah, I'm sure you never imagined that the business desk was so creatively decorated, but yeah.
So you tell us, first of all, how did you get into journalism?
When I was at school, I was going into my first year English, and my English teacher, and she was the sponsor, I guess you'd call it, for the high school newspaper. So I went into class, and all the light boards, I don't know if you remember all that stuff. This is so old fashioned, but back then it was like the light boards and the people working away. And I just immediately thought that's what I want to do. So yeah, it pretty much hit me like that. And then I wasn't particularly in business journalism until I came to Scotland. But when I came here and I started applying for jobs, my first 3 interviews, and they all came kind of rapidly, and they were all for business positions. I think there was some assumption, it's like, oh, she's American, she must be business savvy, which I wasn't particularly, but that's how that happened. And then I just pretty much stayed with it. I do enjoy it, and it is something that I think affects everyone's life. Not everybody appreciates the world of business, but it is something that's important to all of our lives, the economy. It's how we live, it's how we make our own money, it's how we pay for the services that we want. So I've stayed with that.
What was your first business journalism job in Scotland?
That was with the Herald. Yeah. So but I started out in the Edinburgh office of the Herald. I'm now based in Glasgow, and I've kind of flipped around to different things between now and then, but I'm back. Well, not back at the Herald again, I'm back in my dining room again, but I'm back with the Herald again. So
and how's the job changed in that time since you first joined the Herald years ago to now being back there? Obviously it's changed a lot during COVID with working from home, as you've said, but yeah, in general, what are the big changes?
I think the easiest way to describe it is it's condensed. What you've done is, once upon a time, a journalist came in, read press releases, interviewed people, wrote stories, and that was it. You were done, and you went home. And it wasn't like it was that simple, but that was your element of the job. And now it is, and it depends on how you work. With the Herald, we're both print and online, but you're writing the stories, you're writing the headlines, you're finding the pictures, you're sourcing the pictures, you're putting it all on the page, you're then building it and making it for social media, for the website, and then you're also, as much as you can, trying to handle the social media aspects of things. So these were all things that used to be done by different people. They used to be discrete jobs, and now you're doing everything. And the inevitable impact of that is that time is the most precious commodity you can possibly have. There's just, it's just a go, go, go scenario, which I guess for your clients makes it difficult to kind of catch our attention and get a foot in the door.
And on that point, when is the best time to try and catch your attention?
Yeah, it really depends. If it's something, once again, if we're, you know, if you're talking about print or online, it'll vary a bit. But let's say it's something that you want to see appear, either that, you know, if you wanted it to appear today, or if you wanted it to appear in tomorrow's paper, you need to really get in there early, you know, when decisions are being made about, particularly for print, when decisions are being made about where stories are going to be placed, what's the schedule for the day. It's not as demanding for online because there aren't space constraints as such. But still, you know, you don't want to kind of be trying to slide in at sort of 2 o'clock or something like that, because by that point, you know, everybody's got all their other tasks that they have to get through for the day. So it'll be harder to sort of, you know, say, hey, I've got something really important here to do. If it's something less so, less time sensitive, let's say, a bit of forewarning is always good. You know, don't necessarily expect somebody to get back to you that day, because I'll see something and go, that could be interesting for a feature I'm doing next week, or, you know, something of that sort. So there might not be an immediate response, you know, so you have to kind of be prepared for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you always prefer to have an exclusive story? Is that the best way to try and get coverage for your client?
It depends. It depends on what it is. I mean, but yes, what is it? What is that phrase everybody likes? Compelling content. Unique content and compelling content is always something that for us drives readership. So that'll certainly be something we're always looking for. But it doesn't necessarily have to be exclusive, just not. I mean, one of the most annoying things really is to have somebody coming at you with something that either they've kind of already touted around somewhere else and it's already appeared elsewhere, and they're trying to make out to you like, hey, I brought you this, and you're just sort of like, yo, yeah, great, thanks. Or people, smaller firms who are doing things for themselves, one of the mistakes that they will often make is to say, well, we had this news, let's say it was, I don't know, a product launch maybe that might have been quite, you know, that might have some very good news element to it, or maybe financial results or something, but it happened like 4 or 6 weeks ago, you know, and at that point, because I always feel like saying, you know, the clues in the name, it's news, it's new, it's not what happened last month, it's what's happening now.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. And does a good picture make a difference to the story? Could it get coverage when it might otherwise not if the image was good?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, a good picture is pretty much in the online world. It's not an advantage; it's essential. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, the visual for anything online is absolutely imperative, and video as well. I mean, you know, video's a big element too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do you prefer people to get in touch with you? Would you rather they just emailed you or gave you a call, or both, or not press you too much? What would you prefer?
Email's usually best. I know it sounds very, or, you know, people do get in touch with me on, say, LinkedIn and so forth. I'm not, you know, I'll see email the quickest, if you know what I mean. I'm not necessarily sitting there because I can't really write and monitor emails and monitor all my social media channels constantly all at the same time. So email will tend to be the first thing that I would see. And plus it's there. So if it's, once again, getting back to that, if it's something I think, ooh, that might be interesting, but not right now, I've at least got a note of it there to refer back to. I think if you're quite confident that you've got something that's a really good story, and you ring up and want to run it by somebody, particularly if you're going down that offering it to you exclusively route, you know, it can be worth ringing up and saying, look, I've got this. I was going to send you something over, but is it something that you would be interested in? Those kind of phone calls are good. Once again, it just gets back to the time pressures, because if it's a phone call you can do in like 5 minutes and just say, like a taster, is this something you think you might be interested in? Yes, great. Okay, I'll send it over. If it's a phone call to like spend 20 minutes explaining what the story is, that's not so good most of the time, because, as I said, the time constraints that we operate under.
Okay, and can you explain why something might not be a story one day, so you called tomorrow and you're quite interested, but then with the same story perhaps on Friday or next Monday, it might be something you go for? How does that work? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, this is a tough one once again for you guys and for your clients, because it's a difficult one to explain, but it is. It can just be quite random. It depends on what else is happening on the day. It depends on if what you're offering fits in with something else that's happening at the time. There are of course ways to, there will be obvious things, like if it's, I don't know, budget day or something like that, you don't want to be trying to do, but you never know exactly what's happening from one day to the next. As I say, there will be obvious things, but at the same time, it could be a very busy day for just a variety of different reasons that's not obvious to somebody, who's not on the receiving end of it all. So, I mean, I guess, unfortunately, from your point of view, there will always be a certain element of throwing it at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
But there are ways, to hopefully, by being aware of some of these other things, to hopefully narrow that down, so it's not always just kind of a random shot mark.
It's a good idea to see what kind of stories you're usually interested in and what topics you write about, and be targeting more with those ones. So get to know the kind of things a journalist likes covering.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, I know, because I'll talk till, and there's not a word of a lie in it, I'll talk all day about how busy we are, the time pressures we're under, but everybody is, and I appreciate that. I understand that as well. So when I say, hey, get in there, find out what kind of stories your target journalist, I guess, is interested in, what sorts of things. Well, yeah, that takes some time and some research. So, I guess therein comes the argument for why you might want to have, a professional media PR consultant, because that's what they do. So, yeah, that is one thing to be aware of, what it is that that's more likely to capture a particular publication's or a particular journalist's interest.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Kristy. Is there anything else you'd like to say? I've asked you all the questions I had. It's been really insightful.
Well, no, I think that's probably it for the moment. There are plenty of other things I suppose we could talk about, but maybe we'll sit down again another day and we can talk through some other elements of it.
That'd be great. And thanks so much for your time. Thank you.
No problem.
Oh, thank you, Kristy. Really enjoyed hearing that. And I think it builds upon everything that we heard from Jane last week at the Scotsman. But nice to have some new angles and new things to think about when we pitch journalists. So what we've touched on this week has been all about channels, and the homework, if you want to take it on, as I mentioned already, within the worksheet, we have a channel plan, and you could duplicate that and have multiple pages. I would start by mapping out the existing channels that you use, and then I would try and think about whether there are any missing ones that would really help you to achieve your strategy. And then use the template, or if you want, you could adapt that template to make it something that suits you better. But I would suggest making a plan around every channel that you use, who owns it within your organization, and what's the message and to who. And that's going to really help you to refine what sort of content you're creating and what it looks like. So next week, going into week 9, only 2 weeks left, it's going to be crisis. And we've got a really interesting speaker next week who was the head of comms at Manchester Police when the bombing unfortunately happened several years ago. So Amanda's going to be telling us about how she dealt with the aftermath of that and how she managed a communications team to deliver a comm strategy that was changing constantly and really fast moving. So really, really interesting speaker next week. In the meantime, a couple of weeks left, but do feel free to bring colleagues along, also to flag up the content, which is on Facebook Live. So if anybody wants to watch it back, it's all in our video section. So if you missed any weeks, feel free to jump back in again. Going into the last couple of weeks as well, please do make use of the CommsCamp closed group. If you've been following the sessions, if you've been building a plan, it'd be great to get some feedback in there, just really around how you've found it, if you've got stuck with anything, and also use the group. So think about whether, you know, others could help you, whether it's with ideas, whether you're stuck at the strategic part, and we can help you too. So post some questions in there and engage, and we'll make sure you get some good answers. But that's us for this week. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next Thursday at 9:30 for Crisis